My name is Floyd. I'm 68 years old, and until a few days ago I was the husband of Janice, my partner for more than 4 decades. Today, I am just the widower who is left in a house full of memories and people who no longer see me. Tell me something. How can someone be expelled from their own home, days after burying the love of your life? It's hard to believe, I know, but there are stories that don't need to be made up. They just happen. Cold, calculated, like a knife that enters slowly. Maybe you're here because you felt something similar, that feeling that after everything he did for someone, the least would be respect. And even so, what arrives is silence, or worse, a phrase you never imagined hearing. I also thought that this only happened to others. But that night around the dinner table, I discovered that grief, for some, is just the right time to pounce. If you think you've heard it all, wait until you know what my sister-in-law had the courage to tell me, and how that phrase changed everything. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. Sometimes pain doesn't just come from loss, it comes from what is done to us when we are weaker. That night, 7 days after burying Janice, my wife of a lifetime, I heard a phrase that no man should hear, least of all in his own home. It was during dinner, with the table set as if nothing had happened, that Donna, my sister-in-law, looked me in the eye and said, "Now that Janice is dead, grieve, pack your things, and never come back here." My daughter didn't say anything. Her husband didn't either. And in that instant their silence hurt more than her words. I didn't scream. I got up from my chair, went to the bedroom, and closed the door. If you've made it this far, you may have felt this kind of cut. Maybe someone you loved also turned their back on you when they needed it most. If so, know that you are not alone. And if you want to walk with me through this difficult memory, I ask you to leave your support with a like and subscribe. This gives me the courage to continue telling what I keep inside, because what came next, no one imagines. The house was full that night. The cutlery tapped slowly on the plates, as if everyone there was afraid of being the first to speak. The food was the same as always. Donna had brought a pot roast. Amy set the table with napkins Janice liked. Everything seemed almost normal. Almost. But I felt a bitter taste in the air that didn't come from the seasoning. It was a different silence, the kind that seems to hide something behind. People who don't look you in the eye, who laugh joylessly, who speak too softly. I tried to convince myself that it was grief, that they were all just adapting to the void left by Janice. But when you live so long with someone, you learn to notice the things that are not said, and at that table, what was not being said weighed more than any words. That's when Donna cleared her throat, pushed the plate slightly forward, intertwined her fingers, and looked at me as if I were a teacher giving a warning to a distracted student. And he said, in a firm, almost rehearsed voice, "Floyd, now that Janice is gone, I think the best thing is for you to regret and pack your things. This house doesn't make sense to you anymore." The world was silent for a few seconds. The phrase was still in the air when I saw Amy lower her eyes to the plate. Daniel cleared his throat, pulled his cell phone from his pocket, disguising the discomfort, but did not open his mouth. None of them defended me. None of them thought that phrase was absurd. I wanted to ask, "What do you mean, my house no longer makes sense to me? Where did I stop being a part of it?" But I didn't say anything. I just leaned back in my chair, with that silence of someone who is being beaten inside. Donna continued. He said that I would feel better in a smaller, more adapted place, maybe some condominium for seniors where I could make friends my age, and that she and Amy could take care of everything to sell the house, that it was a help. Help. I smiled. I don't know if it's irony, anger, or not to cry right there. Janice had passed away 7 days ago, and now they wanted to pack me as if I were a piece of furniture out of place. The house I built, which I renovated with my own hands, where I planted trees in the backyard, where I spent all Christmases with Janice and my daughter, now it was too big for me. Daniel finally said something. He tried to set a light tone as if it were a technical comment. "Floyd, It's just a matter of logic. This house is spacious, expensive to maintain. You're going to stress about it on your own." I looked at him. To the man who asked me for help 3 years ago to start a technology company that never got off the ground, who used my name to make a loan of $40,000, who said I was like a father to him, and now he came to talk about logic. I finished my plate in silence. I got up calmly, thanked him for dinner and said, "Sorry, today I'm not well." I went to the bedroom. I locked the door. There, alone, I took a deep breath, and I started to think. It's curious how sometimes pain has the effect of clearing things up. In the midst of grief, my mind became sharper. I began to see gestures, old phrases, repeated absences, and what I thought was family. It started to look more like an expired contract. Tell me something. Have you ever had the feeling of being pushed out of your own life by people who claim to love you? Have you ever felt that, at the moment when you most needed a hug, what came was calculation, haste, interest? If you've been through this, comment below. He writes, "I believe," or "I've lived it," or even just a "it's true." Because sometimes knowing that someone understands our pain is already a relief. I stood there in the dark of the room, listening to the dishes being washed in the kitchen, the footsteps down the hallway, muffled laughter. Yes, laughter, as if the night had gone well, as if I had already been taken out of the equation. But what they didn't know is that I'm not the type to scream. I'm the type to take notes, who observes and wait. And it was in that early morning, with the dim light of the lamp on, that I began to write. I took my old notebook, sat at the desk and wrote everything down. Donna's phrase, Amy's silence, Daniel's cynical face, and I was pulling the thread of memories until you get to the numbers. Do you remember how much you've given? How much did you forgive? Help? Finance? I remembered. And now every amount that was once forgotten would start to come back to the fore. But what I discovered in those notes, it was even worse than I thought. Do you have any idea what I found when I decided to review everything I did for them? The next morning, the house was mute. That same house that for so many years breathed with us, Janice and I, now seemed like a place of echo, where even the furniture seemed to look at me with pity. I walked slowly, barefoot, feeling the cold of the ground, as if stepping on sacred ground. Each corner gave me back a memory. The sunken sofa next to her favorite to sit with her feet curled, the armchair next to the bookshelf where she read her mystery books, the old lampshade she insisted on keeping, even when she blinked. Everything there had her mark. The house was not just a wall. It was not just a roof. It was the extension of the life that we built. In the kitchen, the smell of her still hung in the air, mixed with stale coffee and some memory of homemade bread she made on Sundays. I opened a drawer and found the cloths embroidered with initials, the same ones she said no one else used, but which she did out of stubbornness. In the garden, the cacti she cared for so carefully were still firm, as if they didn't even know their owner was gone. I ran my hand over one of the leaves, felt the thorn lightly scratch my finger and thought, they still know how to protect themselves. I went back inside and sat on the edge of the bed. I looked at her pillow, still sunken as if she were there. It was then that the penny dropped. They wanted to get me out of that place, to pull me out of there, as if I were an old piece of furniture. But that was all part of my soul. The house wasn't too big. Greed was it. That's where I started to connect the dots. I remembered the time I sold my old car to help with the entrance to Amy's house. I remembered the night she called me crying because Daniel had been fired and they needed help paying for health insurance. I remembered the day I wrote a check for $20,000 to cover a loan from his technology company. That innovative project that never left PowerPoint. And of course, college. 4 years at a private university with accommodation and everything paid for. Do you know what I got back? A framed diploma and a long silence. I never complained. I never charged. Because father's love, in my mind, was something given without a receipt. But that morning, with the sun coming through the cracks in the curtain and hitting the ring that was still on my finger, I realized Maybe I've spent my whole life being mistaken for a resource, an emotional ATM, a provider of everything but value as a human being. They never asked me if I was okay, if I needed something. When Janice got sick, I was the only one to stay. It took 3 years to take care of her, changing diapers, preparing medicine, cleaning wounds, hearing sighs. Amy came from time to time. Donna appeared with a cake and left talking loudly, as if she were an important visitor. But in the end, it was me and her. And now, without her, what was left of me? A nuisance, a man who takes up space, an unnecessary expense. I sat there for hours until the afternoon began to fall. The portraits on the wall seemed to stare at me with eyes that said, "Wake up, Floyd." One of them was from our 40th wedding anniversary. I was in a grey suit, Janice in a light blue dress. She smiled, a smile that now seemed too distant to remember and too close to be ignored. I took that frame, held it tight, and said in a low voice, "I'm not going to let this become currency." That's when something in me turned, as if the grief had given way to something else. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was a kind of clarity that only comes when we stop expecting from others and start taking care of our own dignity. The hurt became root, a silent, deep root that made me get up, take a deep breath, and say to myself, "You will give back everything they gave you, in the same measure, but with silence." But before making any move, I needed to know how far the hole went, which promises had been made and which were already being broken. Because something told me that that phrase from Donna, "pack your things," was just the tip of a bigger plan. And what I found in the office papers, it was the beginning of a truth much uglier than I imagined. Do you have any idea how much I had already given them? That's that. I didn't do it either, but I found out, and when I found out, I couldn't sleep. I entered the office as if I were entering a crime scene. Every drawer, every folder, every envelope was a clue to what I had already done for them, and what they were trying to erase now. I sat down in the leather chair, the same one that has creaked since the 90s, and started pulling the files. I have always been methodical. He kept everything: contracts, receipts, tickets, even printed payment confirmation emails. It wasn't out of mistrust. It was customary. But that night, every leaf on my hands looked like a scar I had never noticed. I started with Amy's briefcase. College, $23,500 in the first year, plus $24,000 in the second. Then came the unpaid internships, the study trips, the extra courses, the rent while she lived in another city. In total, more than $95,000. And he never apologized to me for the amount. In fact, he asked me with that look of, "Dad, only you can help me." And I helped, because she was my daughter. Then came the car papers. A brand new Toyota, which she said she needed so she wouldn't depend on buses late at night. $70 to $800 in cash, plus insurance. I also pay for myself, so I opened Daniel's folder. 2 loans in his name, but with my approval, $25,000 for the startup that never made it, and then another $15,000 to maintain operations. Operations that consisted, as I recall, of meetings at Starbucks and a website that never made it out of the under-construction phase. And finally, I found the contract for the entrance of the house in Tempe. $60,000. Transferred from my account as a wedding gift. I even found the card I wrote at the time with my crooked handwriting of someone who was trying to look modern. "May this house shelter your love as mine housed ours." Today those words hurt. I added it all up. $220,000. $220,000. It wasn't a typo, not even an exaggeration of memory. It was the exact amount that came out of my savings, the sweat of 40 years of work, my planned retirement, and ended up in the hands of those who now said that I no longer fit in my house. I took a deep breath. I felt a twinge in my chest. It wasn't anger. Not yet. It was something else, an emptiness where the pride of having helped once lived. I always thought that helping was my role. what a real father gives without waiting. But now, seeing everything like this, organized in cold numbers, I understood something I never wanted to admit. They didn't ask me for help. They took me out little by little, like someone who sucks the broth to the bone and then asks if he can throw it away. I was never offered retribution nor true gratitude, just that social obligation to visit me once a month, bring me a ready-made pie and say, "Are you okay, Dad?" while they looked at the clock. And now, without Janice, I was just the weight that was left. I closed the folders. I stood up. I went to the mirror in the hallway and looked at myself as if I were seeing a stranger. A man who spent his life thinking that love was synonymous with total surrender. But now I saw that love without respect is just exploitation in disguise. The question that hammered in my head was, if all this was done out of love, why was I now disposable? I spent that night without sleep, sitting in the living room, surrounded by walls that I painted myself, by furniture that I carried in the move, by paintings that I hung with Janice. And I thought, do they think I'm not going to react? But what they didn't know, the next day, I would leave home not to run away, but to start pulling the thread of truth. And the first place I went, it was the bank. Do you have any idea what I found there? That night, after going through all those folders and adding up every penny of my naivety, I tried to sleep. I lay on the side that had always been mine, and Janice's pillow was still there, intact. Do you know that empty space that is not just physical? It's as if the air around you has changed color. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the ticking of the clock from the living room, which now seemed louder than ever. The tears did not come. It was already something else that took me, a drier, deeper pain, a feeling of floating in a place where no one else could see me. When the clock struck 3:12 a.m., I got up. I walked to the kitchen, prepared a strong coffee as she liked, and returned to the office with an idea in my head. If no one bothered to remember what I did, I'll put it on record. I took an old notebook with a blue cover, the one I used to write down travel plans with Janice, and started writing. Name by name, value by value, date by date, every help, every promise, every disappointment. It was like cleansing the soul, only with a pen. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with it, but writing it gave me a sense of order. As if, by organizing the hurts, I took back control of who I was. For the first time, the idea of leaving crossed my mind. Leaving without warning. Disappear. To leave everything behind and start over in a place where no one saw me as an obligation. But then another question came to me, which weighed more than the desire to escape. How far does this ingratitude go? How far were they willing to go to erase me from the history that I myself built? This question kept me awake until the sun started to rise. That's when I decided, before disappearing, I was going to understand everything, every detail, every move behind that phrase from Donna. And for that, I needed to go where things don't lie, in banks, in contracts, in numbers. The next day, I showered, put on my dark blue suit, the same one I wore to Janice's funeral, and went straight to the Desert Valley Bank. No one there expected to see me. I was greeted by Roger, a former co-worker, now a regional manager. When he saw me, he smiled sadly and shook my hand sincerely. "I'm very sorry for Janice, Floyd. She was an amazing woman." I just nodded. The pain was still there, but now it had company, the coldness of someone who begins to see everything from another angle. I asked to talk privately. We sat in a private room, and I went straight to the point. He said, "I want to know if my name is still in any operation linked to Amy or Daniel. Anything, mortgage, loan, financing." Roger, in a delicate manner, pulled the system and started typing. The silence between one key and another was like the sound of a judge turning pages before giving the sentence. When he finished, he let out a sigh and said, "Floyd, yes, there is. 2 active operations with you as a co-signer." I felt myself freezing inside. The first was the mortgage on Amy and Daniel's house, on their behalf, but with my name as a guarantee. 3 months late. The second was a $25,000 personal loan, also with my name on the contract, requested shortly after the wedding, also late. Roger looked at me with a mixture of compassion and surprise. "Did you know all that?" I nodded, slowly. "No, I didn't know. They didn't tell me. They didn't ask for it. They just used it." I left the bank with a folder of documents under my arm and a bitter taste in my mouth. The same taste as when we realized that you were placed as a plan B in the lives of those who should have you as a priority. I walked to the car with slow steps, and inside, alone, I held the steering wheel for a few seconds before starting the engine. You know when you realize that you weren't just left aside, but used to the end, that your generosity has become a ladder, and now they want to push you off the edge. I'm here opening my heart, telling my story the way it happened. If you're listening, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. There is still a lot stored in here. I thought my name was an honor, but now he was just a number in debt to someone else. And if I didn't do anything, I would end up paying for everything once again. Only this time, I was going to react. But before any movement, I needed to see their faces, see if they could lie by looking into my eyes. And that's why, that on the same day, I drove to the condominium where Amy and Daniel lived. Do you have any idea what I found there? When I parked in front of Amy's condominium, I stayed in the car for a while, just watching. The building was modern, full of mirrored windows, those with a monitored entrance and a vertical garden on the facade. An expensive place, clearly above what Daniel and she could sustain with the kind of life they led. But there they were, as if everything was in order, as if the overdue bills and the overdue mortgage were not their problem. I squeezed the steering wheel hard, not out of anger, out of firmness. I was no longer going to swallow that in silence. I rang the intercom, and it was Amy herself who answered. Her voice came muffled, hesitant. "Hi, Dad. Did anything happen?" I replied calmly. "Yes, it happened. I came to talk." It took her a few seconds before she cleared the entrance. When the door opened, I saw that she was without makeup, wearing a baggy sweatshirt and with deep, dark circles. Maybe he was sleeping. Or maybe it carried something she didn't know how to hide yet. He hugged me quickly, as if greeting an acquaintance. Daniel appeared soon after, also with a crumpled face. He faked a smile. "Floyd, what a surprise." I didn't sit down. I stood, looking right into the eyes of both of them. I opened the briefcase I brought from the bank and placed it on the living room table. "Do you know what this is here?" They looked at each other. Amy crossed her arms. Daniel tried to joke. "Will papers? I hope you have good news." Ignored. I pointed to the first document. "Mortgage, 3 installments in arrears. My name as a co-signer, at risk." Then I pointed to the second. "Commercial loan, 25,000, also late, and also in my name." The silence was immediate. Amy turned pale. Daniel looked away. I continued. "You guys put me in this. They used my name, and now they don't say a word." Daniel took a deep breath, shrugged, and tried the speech. "Floyd, we were expecting a turnaround, a big contract, an opportunity that did not materialize. I was going to tell you." "Were you?" I asked in a low voice. "When? Before or after the bank takes over the house?" Amy tried to intervene. "Dad, it was not so. We just needed a breather. And we thought there was time, and you always helped. I thought he wouldn't mind." "Don't mind," I repeated. "Amy, do you think that a father's love is authorization for abuse?" She was silent. Her eyes watered, but they were not tears of regret. It was the fright of those who were caught. Daniel tried to put his hand on my shoulder. I pushed away gently, but firmly. "You don't know what trust is. They only know how to ask. And when there's nothing left to take away, they try to push me out of my own house." Her voice came out shaky. "It was Aunt Donna who said that, Dad. It wasn't supposed to be that way. But you listened, and he didn't say anything." The room was muted again. I took the briefcase back, looked around, and saw a picture of the two of them smiling on a trip. They seemed happy. They seemed certain that the world would always find a way, and maybe he would, but not at the expense of those who turned their backs. I went to the door. Before leaving, I turned around and said, "Your breathing phase is over. Now I'm the one who will breathe." I left there with the certainty that their house of cards was about to fall. But there was something that still bothered me, something that didn't come from the bank, nor from the debts, but from inside my own home, a detail that until then I had not noticed. Can you imagine what was hidden there, right under my nose? On the way back home, I made sure to stop by Amy's condominium again. I stopped across the street, inside the car, with the windows closed. It was late afternoon, the sky of Tempe orange, as if the sun was ashamed to set in the face of so much disloyalty. Their building was beautiful on the outside, clean facade, but what caught my attention were the details. Daniel's car had the hood up and a bottle of water hanging from the rearview mirror, a sign of an engine overheating, perhaps. Next to the dumpster, stacked pizza boxes, cheap grocery bags, and, what hurt me the most, torn pieces of mail with a bank logo. Charge notices, by the way. I knew how to recognize a life out of control. I've spent my entire life analyzing credit and financial profiles, and what I saw there was the portrait of two adults trying to maintain the pose with borrowed money, or torn out. I stood there for a good 10 minutes just watching, not out of revenge, but because at that moment I realized that it wasn't just a matter of hurt, it was a matter of survival. They weren't just discarding me, they were trying to replace me with the value of the house where I lived with Janice. When I returned home, the weight on my back seemed different, dense, colder. I called an old colleague from the bank, not Roger, another more discreet one, and I confirmed what I had already felt in my stomach. The mortgage on their house was 3 months late. The credit card had been declined twice in the last week. Daniel's company had been closed months ago and was registered as a defaulter in the state of Arizona. And the most curious thing, their bank mailing address was redirected to my home, mine. That is, I was the guarantor, the emergency address, but he was no longer welcome there. I sat in the armchair in the living room and stared at the wall clock. Tick, 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 tick. The sound seemed to say, they knew all along. Donna, my sister-in-law, saying that a dinner was not an impulse. It was a warning. They were already plotting, testing the limits of my patience and lucidity. I understood then that the plan was not just to get me out of the house. It was to occupy it, replace history with necessity, and throw my memory in the same trash where those torn invoices were. It was at that moment, sitting alone in that room where the smell of Janice's perfume still hovered, that a phrase escaped my mouth, as if it were born from within the pain. There is no greater betrayal than the one that comes from the one we saved from shipwreck. I knew I was hurt, but something inside me told me not to stop, because the worst was yet to come. And what kept me standing? It was the silent promise that no one was going to pull me out of there without knowing exactly what it would cost. If you've come this far with me, stay a little longer, because what I discovered in the following hours, it completely changed everything I thought about that family, and there's a letter that I haven't told anyone yet. Can you imagine what I found in the basement of the house, inside the box where Janice kept our old documents? 2 days after that visit to Amy's house, my phone rang in the late morning. Known but unsaved number, Donna. I answered in a dry voice. She, on the other side, looked sweeter than ever. He said he wanted to talk calmly, that maybe I had got it all wrong, that the atmosphere at dinner was not ideal. I took a deep breath and asked, "What do you want to talk about, Donna?" And she replied, "About what is best for everyone, including you." We made an appointment at a coffee shop near the hospital where Janice was undergoing chemotherapy. Ironic. I arrived earlier, ordered a black coffee, and sat in front of the door. When she entered, she looked like something out of a sportswear catalogue. Sunglasses in her hair, gym clothes, that smile of someone who arrives rehearsed. He sat down and started with the clichés. "How are you? It must be difficult. Janice was a wonderful woman. I just listened. I didn't fall into the trap of kindness. I let her speak. That's when, in the middle of the conversation, she blurted out, "Look, Floyd, no one here wants to pressure you. We just think that to avoid headaches, maybe it would be more practical if you already left the house. Before the inventory thing complicated everything with Amy, you know." She spoke as if commenting on time, but that was like a snap inside me. I had already understood the game, but hearing from her mouth confirmed it. It wasn't about grief. It wasn't about space. It was about possession, about preparing the way for the house to be clean for my daughter, as an inheritance, no debt, without my name, only hers. To avoid a headache. And as if my presence were an obstacle, an inconvenient interference in the division of something that, by the way, had not even been legally discussed yet. I kept looking at her, trying to find some trace of the woman who took care of Janice in the first weeks of treatment. But what I saw was something else, a person who took advantage of her sister's fragility to settle in, be part of it, and then pull the rug out from under those who held everything until the end. She even tried to say that it would be better for my health, that I needed a lighter place, a small apartment with an elevator near the center, as if he were doing me a favor. "Amy can visit you whenever she wants," she said. He just didn't say that the visit would be with the key in his pocket. Because deep down, the plan was this: to remove the old man with the minimum of friction, to put the daughter as a natural heir, to erase what was experienced inside. The house, for them, was just a valuable asset. For me, it was a piece of my soul. It's one thing to accept death. It's another thing to be buried alive. No. There are moments in life when we realize that love is no guarantee of anything. You can give everything, be everything, sustain, care, hold the world on your back, and yet being left aside as a nuisance. And this hurts more than any declared betrayal, because it comes disguised as care. It comes wrapped up in phrases like, "It's for your good." Have you ever been through something like this, of someone telling you that they are helping you when in fact they are pushing you to the end? If you've ever felt that, comment below. He writes, "I know how it is," or "I understand you," or just, "It's true." Because at these times, knowing that someone listens to you is like a glass of water in the middle of the desert. I finished my coffee, got up, and before I left I looked her in the eye and said, "Donna, you're more like Janice than you realize, but you lack the good part." She did not answer, smiled. But that smile was that of someone who realized that he had lost the advantage. At that moment, I knew I wasn't going to back down, and I also knew that there was more to come. Something in her eyes told me that that plan had been in motion for a long time. And when I came home and went into the basement, Janice's blue box was right where she had left it, but inside her, there was something I had never seen, something that no one expected me to find. Can you imagine what was hidden among her documents, right under everything that looked like just old paper? Janice's blue box was in the same corner of the basement where she had always kept her old papers, behind her suitcases, between a wool blanket and a bag of Christmas ornaments. I went down calmly, carrying that strange feeling that something was calling me there, and when I opened it, there were the photo albums, the old receipts for our first car, birthday cards we wrote to each other. But at the bottom, at the very bottom, was a closed brown envelope with a rusty clip. Inside it, a folder with copies of documents that I didn't even remember existed, and among them a power of attorney signed by me from almost 10 years ago, which gave Janice full powers over our joint assets. And along with it, a sketched will, never finalized but with scribbles of her, noting, "If something happens to me, I want Floyd to stay here. Amy and Donna don't understand the value of this house." I stood still for a while, reading and rereading it. It was as if she was there with me, saying, "Don't let them take this from us." That phrase grounded me in a way I hadn't felt in days. I walked up the stairs slowly, went to my office, and locked the door. I sat in my chair, opened my old notebook, and began what would henceforth be my plan of silent justice. First step. I took my old contact book. There were still some numbers from the bank days, people who now worked in law firms, others who had gone into mortgage and inventory areas. I called Mark, an old friend who now manages inheritance and estate division processes. I explained the situation in a rough way, asked for discretion. In less than 3 hours, he emailed me the updated reports of Amy's home mortgage, the co-liability clauses, and the legal consequences of my name involved. I then contacted Alan, an accountant who helped me with retirement a few years ago. I asked for a complete overhaul of my assets, investment accounts, pension fund, life insurance, old stocks, and the car. He was surprised by my firm and direct voice. "Are you thinking of moving, Floyd?" he asked. I replied calmly, "I'm thinking of putting the right pieces in their proper places." By the end of that afternoon, I already had in my hands a detailed survey of everything that still belonged to me, and everything that could be moved, frozen, or renegotiated. I found out that legally, even with Janice's death, the house was still in my name, and any movement would have to go through me. In other words, their plan depended on my silence, and silence is something I know how to use very effectively. He didn't want war. I didn't want exposure. He wanted proportional justice. I wanted to look into the eyes of each one of them and see the mirror breaking. They thought they were dealing with a tired old man, defeated by grief. But they forgot who I was, a financial analyst, former risk director, accustomed to dismantling fraud with 3 questions and half a sheet of paper. I started to draw up a plan. Nothing illegal, nothing violent, only truth and paper. Because signed paper is stronger than blood promise. I planned to review the deed to the house, freeze automatic transfers, update insurance, and, more importantly, shield everything with clauses that prevent any movement without my direct endorsement. And it didn't stop there. I knew that Daniel still had hope for a financial miracle, and I knew that, if desperation hit, he would come to me with another proposal. And that's what I expected, because this time I was not only going to listen, how I was going to record. Now I moved like a man who had nothing left to lose, and who has nothing left to lose. It has everything to win. Can you imagine what I found out the next day when I received an email with the detailed statement of the joint account that Janice had maintained with her sister, hidden from me for years? The next morning, as soon as the sun cut the cracks in the blind, I already had the phone in my hand. He was no longer a man who woke up aimlessly. He was someone who woke up with function. I opened my old leather diary, the one I used in my bank days, and started calling. Surprised voices, but always warm. "Floyd? Boy, I thought you were gone." "Disappearing is not me, Jim. I was just silent for a while." One by one, I activated the pillars of my old network: managers, analysts, consultants, people of trust, people who knew my ethics, my precision. I didn't have to explain much. Suffice it to say that it needed a discreet check, and everyone made themselves available. In a few hours, the answers came. Daniel, in the last 2 months, tried to refinance with 3 different institutions. All denied, bad reputation, default, and a risk analysis that no one wanted to assume. In addition, he opened 2 requests for a line of credit in Amy's name, one personal, one business, both blocked due to document inconsistency. That explained the urgency, the impatience. They already knew that the rope was around their necks, hence the conversation at dinner. That's why Donna's rehearsed phrases. The rush for me to start my life over somewhere else was just a more polite way of saying, "Get out soon, because we need your home to survive." I went back to my computer and reviewed each of my accounts. Changed the passwords. I disabled old shared access. I have blocked co-authorization of joint transactions. I called the insurance company and asked for a new policy in my exclusive name. And more importantly, I informed the county clerk's office that any movement in my name, especially involving real estate, could only be done with my physical presence and notarized signature. Every step was millimeter. I wasn't going to leave any loopholes. It was in this process that a thought came to me that caught me off guard. I sat down, looked at the back of the room, where Janice's armchair was still in the same place, and thought, if she were here, what would she say? Maybe he told me not to harden so much. Perhaps he would ask me for patience. But part of me knows that if she knew what her sister was doing, he would have closed the doors on her before leaving. She trusted too much. And I, because I love her so much, I learned to trust with her eyes. But now, my eyes were open, and what I saw, it was the urgency to protect myself. It was at this point in the story that I felt something different, a mixture of grief and strategy, as if pain now serves as a lens. And you know, if this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, help me carry it forward. Like and subscribe here to the channel. This makes more difference than you think, because there are people out there going through similar things, and sometimes all they need is to hear that they are not alone. At the end of that afternoon, I made another call, this time to an old real estate consultant who worked with me for almost 10 years. I asked if there was movement in the neighborhood, interested parties, brokers prowling, and he confirmed. In the last few weeks, 2 calls asking for an evaluation of my house, one in the name of a family friend, the other in the name of a new consulting firm, which, when we pulled the record, was linked to a certain Daniel R. Jones. Daniel, using orange, using loopholes, using time. I closed the phone calmly, but inside me, something was starting to heat up. I wasn't going to explode. It wasn't my way. But it was time to turn the game around. But that same night, I received an unexpected message on my cell phone. Unknown number, short, direct text. Can we talk? It's about your daughter. I know what's going on. The signature at the end of the message made my heart race. He was someone I never imagined I would hear again. You have no idea who came to me at that moment. And what did she reveal to me? The message only said, "Can we talk? It's about your daughter. I know what's going on." Signed, Becky. It gave me a tightness in my chest. Becky, Janice's former colleague in the hospital days, a trusted friend, who left after an old disagreement with Donna. I never knew exactly why. But I replied, we made an appointment in a discreet cafe, and the next day she appeared, serious, with an expression between care and urgency. He handed me a manila envelope and said, "Floyd, I never wanted to get involved, but there's something you need to know, and it's now." Inside the envelope were copies of emails and messages between Donna and a broker. Old conversations, started in Janice's 2nd year in treatment. They exchanged ideas about evaluating the house, seeing if the brother-in-law would resist much, and how to convince the daughter to accept the transition. The dates matched the period when Donna started to frequent our house more often, always saying that she was there to help. I left that meeting with my head boiling. It was all premeditated. Everything. Janice's disease had not even stabilized, and they were already studying terrain. That night, I didn't sleep, but not pain. It was focus. It was firmness. I sat down at my office desk and wrote a letter. 2 pages, objective, with legal language. I stated my formal intention to leave as a co-signer of the mortgage on Amy's home, alleging financial misconduct by borrowers, concealment of information, and personal risk. I addressed it to the bank with copies for my lawyer, my accountant, and to Amy herself. I posted the letters the next day, personally. I made a point of filing everything. And when I returned home, I sat down with my heart in silence, because he knew something was going to explode, and it did. In the late afternoon, my phone rang. It was her, Amy. The voice trembled. "Dad, what is this? The bank called. Did you send a notification? Why all this?" I took a deep breath. Because I've spent my life helping Amy, and now you're trying to erase me. His mother's house became a target, and you, instead of protecting me, he was silent. She tried to argue. I said that they were just reorganizing the finances, that they didn't want to harm me, that everything would be solved. But I kept my tone firm. If you want to solve it with paper. From today on, everything ours will be in writing. She was mute for a few seconds, and I knew that the message had been understood. The removal of my name from the mortgage meant that the bank could demand full repayment of the debt, and that they would have to renegotiate without my reputation as collateral. And I knew they couldn't afford it. For the first time, I felt that the tables had turned. For the first time, I felt that they were afraid of me. And you know, if there's one thing I've learned too late, it's that fear changes anyone's intentions. If you've been with me this far, I'll tell you sincerely, stay longer. Because what's next? It's the moment when I look them in the eye, and I let them realize on their own that they have lost everything. But before that, there was a day, a single day, that changed everything again. A lunch, a visit, an unexpected phrase that came out of the mouth of the only grandson I have. Do you have any idea what he told me? It was a sultry Tuesday, one of those when the sun seems to weigh on the roof of the house. I was on the porch, watering Janice's succulents, or at least trying to keep the remaining ones alive, when I heard a quick knock on the gate. I looked through the cracks in the wood and saw Daniel standing there, his dress shirt crumpled, his eyes sunken as if he hadn't slept properly for days. I opened the gate slowly. He tried to smile, but his face trembled. "Can I come in? We need to talk. Man to man." I was silent for a second, but I gave in. After all, sometimes, silence is what bothers the most those who arrive armed with words. He walked in, sat down at the kitchen table without even asking, and began to talk like someone who pours out his soul. But he was a soul more concerned with digits than regrets. "Floyd, I know everything was kind of out of place, but I'm trying to keep everything standing. The company will get back on its feet. It's just a matter of time. We just need things to be stable." Amy's very shaken by all this, and I just stared. What he said in words was an attempt at conciliation, but what his body screamed was fear, real fear. He was pale. The voice failed. He sweated at his temples. He was not a safe man trying to resume the dialogue. He was a cornered man looking for a way to escape. That's when he changed his tone. The voice dropped and became sharper. "If this house comes up for grabs, Floyd, Amy may end up with nothing, and that will hurt. She's your daughter." I gave a short, cold laugh. "I'm not the one who's putting this house at risk, Daniel. It's you." The sentence came out drier than I expected. He widened his eyes, as if for the first time he had heard the echo of what they were doing. He was silent for a while, then stood up, looked around as if he were saying goodbye to something, and walked out the front door without looking back. I stood there for a few minutes, listening to the sound of his footsteps walking away on the sidewalk, and at that moment a memory came to me. An old scene from when he came to ask me for help to open the first company. Janice was still doing well at the time. We had dinner together every Sunday, and I remembered Janice saying, "Floyd, give it a try. He seems to want to build something good." I did, and I gave it again. And I gave until there was nothing left of me in the equation. It's strange how memory smells. That day, she cooked salmon with rosemary, his favorite dish. I remember it as if it were now. You know, there are memories that never go away. We even forgive, but the scene comes back, the smell comes back, the voice comes back. And if you on the other side also have a memory like this, which was marked, share it with me in the comments. It can be a beautiful, bitter, or just strange memory. But he shares. Sometimes what you keep inside can touch someone on the other side of the screen. After Daniel left, the house was eerily silent. It was not empty. It was a harbinger. I knew he was going to tell Amy everything. I knew that this would change the structures of that alliance. But what I didn't expect, that was what would happen 2 days later. Because in the midst of this storm, It was my grandson who showed up here, and what he told me, it was like a sharp blade going through his chest. Do you dare to imagine what comes out of a child's mouth when the adult world has already begun to poison his heart? 2 days after that meeting with Daniel, I was still mulling over his every word. But it was an unexpected visit that caught me off guard. The gate creaked slightly, and when I looked out the window, there he was. My grandson, Noah, the 10-year-old boy, always wearing a crooked cap and the same dirty sneakers that Amy insists on not throwing away. He had a jar of cookies in his hand and a suspicious look on his face. I opened the gate and he looked at me from the bottom up, a little awkwardly, and said, "My mother sent this, but he said it was just to deliver, not for me to stay." That hit hard. "But do you want to come in?" I asked. He thought for a few seconds and replied, "Only if it doesn't get in the way." I went in with him, prepared chocolate milk as I did before, and we sat on the porch. We talked about silly things, soccer, video games, the new teacher, but then out of nowhere he blurted out, "Grandpa, is it true that you are no longer going to live here?" I swallowed. "Who told you that?" "Mom said this house is too big for an old man alone, and that maybe you'll go somewhere else. That's because Grandma died, right?" At the time, my heart sank. He didn't say it maliciously. It was just a boy trying to understand the world in half. But there, on that balcony, I realized the size of the damage. Even Noah was already being prepared to accept my absence as a normal thing. "I still live here, son, and I like it here. This is where your grandmother planted those succulents, remember? This is where you set up the sheet tent in the living room." He nodded, squeezing the glass with both hands. "I think Grandma would be sad if you left." "I think so too, Noah. Very sad." After he left, I left the cookie jar in the kitchen and went to the file cabinet in my office. There was a folder there that I hadn't opened in a while. It was Janice's, things she liked to keep, old photos, documents, cards. But that day, something made me pull everything more closely, and between a handwritten apple pie recipe and a photograph of us cuddling in the garden, I found a bundle of letters tied with a blue ribbon. I sat there on the floor for a few minutes, just looking at it. It was her handwriting, round, firm, delicate. I began to read, one by one, notes from Amy as a child, promising to one day take care of Mom the way she took care of me. I had to take a deep breath. You could feel the affection that existed, and how much all that was now buried under a rush for patrimony. But what struck me the most was a letter that Janice never delivered. The envelope had written only, "To Amy, if I'm no longer here." My hands trembled when I opened it. Her handwriting more shaky, a sign that she was already sick. She began by saying that she knew time was short, but that she hoped to see Amy grow into a woman who looked beyond herself. And then came the part that tore me inside. "Take care of your father. He spent his life taking care of everything, everyone. He was silent when he felt pain. He did not complain when his body was tired. You may never know, daughter, how much he sacrificed to keep this house standing, but I know. And if he's alone when I'm gone, for God's sake, don't let him feel disposable. He deserves to be protected now." I closed my eyes tightly. I pressed the letter to my chest and stood there, on the floor of the office, feeling a knot in my stomach. Janice knew. I knew about my loneliness, my silence. I knew that in the end, I would be what was left to hold the dignity of our history. And the worst thing is that she trusted Amy. She believed that our daughter would be different, but it wasn't. It was part of the same plan, and at that moment I was sure it wasn't just about money. It never was. It was about memory, about legacy, and they were trying to erase mine. No, sometimes a letter can be more powerful than any will, because there was the voice of someone who could no longer speak. And that no one can dispute. If you've also ever found something like this, hidden among papers, a memory that changed you, share with me in the comments. Sometimes it's in an old phrase that we find the strength to do what needs to be done. That night, I slept with the letter under my pillow, and for the first time in weeks I dreamed about Janice. She looked at me without saying anything, But in her eyes, there was something that told me, now you know what you need to do. And that's exactly what I did the next day. I called Amy. I scheduled a lunch, one last invitation, because I knew that it was time to look my daughter in the eye and ask, when did you decide to forget who raised you with your own hands? The morning after the dream with Janice, I woke up earlier than usual. The sun hadn't even touched my bedroom window when I sat on the edge of the bed, her letter still there, folded carefully under the pillow. I took a deep breath, drank my bitter coffee as I always liked, and walked to the office with the firmness of someone who knows he is going to do something that changes everything. I opened the computer, reviewed the documents once again, read word for word the notification that I wrote myself with the help of the lawyer, a firm, direct tone with no room for half-interpretations. With a single click, I forwarded the email to the bank, to Amy, to Daniel, to their lawyer, and to safety to myself. The message was clear. From that moment on, any attempt to take possession, sell, transfer, or benefit from the house where I lived would be considered patrimonial infringement and would immediately trigger a lawsuit. I also informed in writing the definitive withdrawal of my consent as co-responsible or guarantor of any financial transaction linked to the CPF or company of my daughter and son-in-law. Short, cold, and cool. With that shipment, I cut the last thread of dependence they still had on me. A deep silence took over the house, and for the first time in a long time, this silence did not weigh on him. It didn't take half an hour, and the phone rang. It was her. Amy, I answered. The voice on the other end was choked. Dad, why is that? Why this document? There was a pause. Do you want to see me suffer? Do you want to see my marriage sink? I was quiet for a few seconds. Then I answered, without raising my tone, but with a clarity that even I didn't know I still carried. I've wanted to see you happy all my life. I gave everything I had, but you chose to exclude me from the house I built with my hands, the house where his mother dreamed of growing old, and now you'll have to accept living without it. On the other side, silence. Then, a contained cry, not a cry of real pain. It was the cry of one who saw the ladder pulled under their feet. Father, please. Don't call me Dad only when money is tight, Amy. And I hung up. I stood there holding the phone still to my ear, as if I was waiting for something to change. But nothing has changed. Nothing needed to change. That moment was like closing a door that had been ajar out of politeness for too long. There was no turning back. Something in me had been buried along with Janice, and what was left now was someone who was no longer willing to shut up to avoid conflict. The generous Floyd, the Floyd who said yes for fear of hurting, rested in the garden next to the woman he loved. What remained was another man. Older, yes. Quieter too, but finally awake. And as if fate had felt this cut, that afternoon brought one last unexpected visit, one I could never have predicted. Someone from the past. Someone who knew things I didn't know yet. Because, as they say, sometimes the story doesn't end when we think it's over. Sometimes she was just waiting for the last piece. Do you dare to wonder who knocked on my door that day? 3 days after that last phone call with Amy, a letter arrived with the bank's seal. I already knew what it was, even before it opened. I left it on the table for a few hours, as if respecting the morning of an announced truth. When I finally broke the envelope, I calmly read, "Notification of default. The mortgage number such, registered in the name of Amy and Daniel Mitchell, is in the process of foreclosure. The deadline for voluntary eviction is 30 days from the date of this notification." I closed my eyes for a moment, not for pleasure, nor for sadness. It was a long breath of those who understand that they got where they needed to go. On the same day, I learned that Amy had tried to hurriedly file for refinancing. He sought contacts, called old college classmates, even called a former boss, trying to get a letter of recommendation. But without my name as a co-signer, with the tarnished history of delays and the lack of proof of real income from Daniel, everything was denied. For the first time, the doors began to close for her. Not out of other people's malice, but because the castle-like appearance they supported was rotten from the base. The only thing that surprised me was the speed with which everything fell apart. Donna, the sister-in-law, the same one who poisoned the backstage of our family, disappeared. It disappeared like dust in the wind. Amy tried to talk to her twice. One call ignored, another answered with a, "I got too involved, now I can't do anything else." A day when the boat starts to sink, the first to jump are the ones who have never wanted to row. From my corner, I watched everything without celebration. There was no victory in that, only justice, and not a noisy justice made to humiliate, but the silent justice that teaches with pain, what love tried to teach with affection. What hurt me the most was not seeing them falling. It was knowing that everything could have been avoided with a gesture of humility. Only one. During this same period, one of Amy's closest friends, a boy named Leonard, who was her best man at her wedding, sent a message saying that he preferred not to get involved. Others began to move away. Her reputation, which has always been a controlled, balanced, exemplary woman, began to be eroded behind the scenes. People knew more than she realized. And the worst thing is that at these times, no one warns you that you have become a subject. You just feel the air getting different. The slowest responses, the ignored messages, the unscheduled meetings. I saw all this happen without leaving my seat. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch with a coffee and look up at the Arizona sky, that wide sky that seems to listen to our thoughts. And I thought to myself, there are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling we can help another heart to breathe. So if this story I'm sharing here makes sense to you, if somehow it seems to talk about something you lived or witnessed, like this video, subscribe to the channel. Help me make these words find those who also need a breather. We never know where a story can hit deep. What kept me going was not anger. It was Janice's memory. She taught me that firmness can also be love, that letting someone reap what they have sown is not revenge. It is teaching without raising your voice. And now, watching those who turned their backs on me struggling not to drown in debt, I saw that the harvest finally began. But what I didn't expect, it was what came later. A final decision, a gesture I needed to take, and that it was going to change not only my life, but the course of everything that would come ahead, because the past had already taken its toll on them. But the future was still mine. And you want to know what I did with it? When I opened the door that afternoon, I confess that for a moment my heart missed a step. It was Amy. The red, swollen eyes, the scarred face of someone who cried more than he could hide. In our hands, a cardboard box, one of those where we put papers that we don't want to look at anymore, but we can't throw away either. She stood on the threshold, not daring to enter, as if the house itself rejected her. "Dad, can I talk to you?" The voice came out low, almost a whisper. I just took a step back and nodded. She entered slowly, as if stepping into a sacred place, and sat at the table where Janice set up the flower arrangements. The box trembled in her lap. I stood. I didn't offer water, hugs, or words. She took a deep breath and started. I didn't know everything, Dad. He did not know about the real debt. I didn't know that Daniel had hidden those late installments. He said he was solving it. I trusted. She spoke, and every sentence felt like a brick being taken off her back and placed on the table between us. I made a mistake. I let Aunt Donna in too much. She said she wanted to help, that Mom would have wanted that you would be happier somewhere else. He put his hand to his face, trying to wipe away his tears. I believed, Dad. I was blind. I remained silent, not out of coldness, but because sometimes silence is the only form of truth. She opened the box and took out Janice's letter, that same one, the letter I had already found, days before. I just read it now. She ran her fingers over the paper as if touching an old wound. Mom, she trusted me, and I betrayed that trust. I betrayed you too. When she said this, A part of me, perhaps the oldest, the most tired, felt a tremor, as if my soul had given a sigh that I had been holding for weeks. I don't want to lose you, Dad. I don't want it to end like this. I need your help. I don't have anyone else. It was then, right at that time, that something strange happened inside me. It wasn't anger. It was no relief. It was kind of a clarity, as if all the pieces finally fit together. Sometimes the truth comes late, but it still arrives strong enough to turn our lives upside down. And if you're still listening to me here, I tell you, stay with me until the end. Because what happened after that, it's the kind of thing we take with us for the rest of our lives. Amy kept crying, her shoulders shaking, her breathing unadjusted. She looked smaller than I remembered, more fragile, more human. But even so, I didn't go to her. I didn't put my hand on his shoulder. I didn't try to console her. I just said what needed to be said, with a calmness that surprised me. "You gave me a funeral, Amy." She lifted her face, confused. "What do you mean? When you told me to leave your mother's house, you buried the father I was all my life, generous, present, willing. I died that day, and since then, you've only been talking to what's left of me." She began to stammer an answer, but I raised my hand, asking for silence. "I gave you time," I continued, "time to look at yourself, time to understand what he did, time to repair. But now, each one will have to live with what they did." She broke down in a cry that was not only of regret, it was of realization. The penny had dropped. There was no going back to what we were before. We stood there for whole minutes, just breathing the same heavy air that carried the shadows of everything that was said and everything that would never be said again. She put the letter away, closed the box slowly, and stood up. "Dad, so, is it over?" I asked, seeing hope die in the corner of her gaze. "It's not over," I replied. "It just changed." She hesitated, as if she wanted to hug me, but gave up in the middle of the movement. He walked to the door with slow steps and left without looking back. I stood there, staring at the emptiness that was left in her place. I knew that this moment had been the definitive break, but the strangest thing, it's just that I didn't feel alone. I felt firm. I felt that Janice was there somehow, telling me, "Now begins the part that is only yours." And it was exactly that night, a few hours after Amy left, that I received an unexpected call, a proposal, an invitation, something that would completely change the course of what was to come. Can you imagine who called me, and what did she want to tell me? The call came when the sky was already turning lilac behind the mountains. I was sitting at the kitchen table, running my fingers over the rim of the empty cup, when the phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I answered cautiously. On the other side, a male, firm, professional voice. "Mr. Floyd, this is Robert Turner, head of compliance at Northbridge Investments. I think you know the name Daniel Mitchell." I was silent, just listening. He continued, "We received a detailed anonymous report involving financial inconsistencies from your son-in-law's former startup, and mentions you as a possible guarantor of past transactions. Before we proceed with any analysis, I need to confirm, are you still connected to him in any way?" I took a deep breath. "No, I'm not." The answer came out clean, solid, and in that instant I felt as if an old weight was slipping down my shoulders. Turner thanked him, said they would end any attempt to link, and hung up. It was not difficult to guess the rest. The next day, a storm began to fall on Daniel, not of rain, but of reality. He had been trying to raise funds for one last project, a digital platform that he said would be the turn of the century, an idea without structure, without base, without ballast. But still, he believed he would convince investors with his way of talking fast and throwing technical terms in the air like confetti. The problem is that the world outside our family had already begun to know Daniel for real. My network of contacts mapped everything precisely. Credit score below 500. practically a public certificate of financial irresponsibility, default records accessible to any serious business, a risk analysis that no one wanted to take. When he sent the proposals to the accelerators and investment funds, they all came back with the same polite response: "Your profile does not meet the compliance criteria." That's when the final blow came. One report, the same report Turner mentioned, was quietly leaked to investors, pointing to serious flaws in his former startup's accountability, inconsistencies, personal expenses posted as company expenses, movements without justification. The project died before it was born, and with it, the last flame of hope that Daniel still held as an excuse died. I learned from sources I cannot cite that his last partner, the only one who still believed in his promises, slammed the door after discovering that Daniel had tried to use his son's name in a personal credit application. From then on, the domino effect was inevitable. The lease on their apartment, already delayed for months, was finally cancelled. The owner gave 10 days to vacate. Amy, desperate, tried to renegotiate, beg, offer partial payment. Nothing worked. They were about to lose the only roof they still had. And ironically, the same pride they displayed so pompously on social media now slept on the floor, because there was no more bed, no more promise, no more world to hide in. I watched everything from a distance, from the same place where I watched it all my life, from my silent balcony, watching the neighborhood breathe. I didn't vibrate. He doesn't smile. I didn't wish evil. Because their fall was no cause for joy. It was just the natural echo of all that they had sown with neglect, ingratitude, and greed. And life is disciplined. Sooner or later, it charges with the same hand you use to push someone. But I confess one thing. That evening, sitting alone, watching the sun melt behind the Scottsdale Mountains, I felt something I didn't expect to feel. It was not revenge. It was not a triumph. It was a strange peace. A peace that said, "Now, Floyd, now your part of the story begins." But this peace did not last long, because a few hours later, someone knocked on my door. It wasn't Amy. It wasn't Daniel. It wasn't Donna. He was someone I hadn't seen in many years, and who held in his hands a truth that would change everything once again. You dare to wonder who had the courage to come to me at that moment. And what did this person come to reveal? I woke up before the sun that day. The house was quiet, but it wasn't that heavy silence that had accompanied me for weeks. It was another kind of silence, one that seemed to call me outside. I grabbed the coffee mug, put on my coat, and walked to Janice's garden. The succulents were firmer than ever, and the cacti, oh, those cacti of hers, seemed to point to the sky like little antennae of resistance. I touched each pot slowly, running my hand through the damp soil. "You took good care of them, Jan," I muttered. And for the first time, I missed it, but not pain. There was a rest in that, an accepted endpoint, no fight. I sat on the wooden bench I built our first year there and pulled out the blue notebook that had been with me since the day of dinner. Every page was there, values that came out of my pocket, broken promises, phrases that hurt me more than they should, dates of disrespect, details that I never wanted to remember, but I had to record so as not to go crazy. I spent a few minutes flipping through one last time, not with spite, but with the calm of someone who finally understands the complete drawing of the story. Then I closed the notebook, took a deep breath, and walked to the back of the yard, where the small fire pit area I built for Noah to roast marshmallows when he was younger. I stacked some sticks, put the notebook in the center, and struck the match. The flame took a few seconds to catch. But when it caught on, it rose slowly, elegantly, as if it understood that this was not destruction. It was liberation. I stood there, watching the pages curl up, turn grey, melt away in the gentle morning breeze. And as the smoke rose, I whispered, "This is not revenge. It's maturity." The words came out so natural that they even surprised me, and it was true. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt my chest open, light, breathing whole. That notebook was not just a record of pain. It was the cycle I needed to end. When the last leaf turned to dust, I felt, in the simplest and most discreet way, that I was free. I looked around. The house looked beautiful in the morning light. The garden flourished even without Janice's hands, and I realized that this house had fulfilled its mission with me. He didn't have to fight for it like a castaway fighting for the plank. I could go, not sent off, not pressured, not injured, but decided, from the inside out. Later that afternoon, I contacted a trusted broker. He said he wanted to put the house up for sale. She asked why. I replied, "Because now it's my choice." She agreed, without question. I chose Flagstaff. The mountains, the cold air, the smell of pine. Janice always said she wanted a cabin there so we could grow old together, away from the noise. Life didn't let it be that way, but I could honor what was left of the dream. And before the sun went down, I sat down again on the porch, feeling the lightness of someone who closes a book after reading to the last page. The future, for the first time in a long time, seemed mine, but before leaving, there was still one last gesture. Something I needed to do, and that would definitively close this entire story. Can you imagine what was the last goodbye I needed to give? When I left that house for the last time, I closed the door with the calm of someone who closes a chapter that no longer fit in my own skin. The blindfold went above what I expected, and before handing over the keys, I walked to the room that once belonged to Amy. I put on the bed the copy of the letter that Janice wrote to her, the same one I found in the old things. And I left it there, without a note, without explanation. Whoever wanted to understand would understand. Then I continued my trip to Flagstaff, where I rented a simple wooden house with the smell of pine and windows that let the morning light in without asking permission. I adopted an elderly dog named Walter, who sleeps more than he walks, but who accompanies me as if he understands my every silence. Today, my days are made up of walks, reading, fresh coffee, and a small garden that I am starting over, plant by plant, with the good memories of my Janice guiding me. As for Amy, she texts me from time to time. I always respond with the same, "I hope you're well." It's not coldness, it is maturity. It is the space that she dug herself. I don't hold hatred. I just don't carry the weight that doesn't belong to me anymore. They say that here in the neighborhood people call me the quiet gentleman who takes care of the roses. And I even like that, because in the end, I discovered that sometimes the greatest justice is not to punish anyone. It's just moving on and letting life take care of the rest. And if there is a lesson in this whole path, perhaps it is this. No matter how much love we plant, one day we need to learn to prune what hurts us. Love does not ask to be stepped on. Love does not require us to disappear from our own home. Love, the true one, is the one that leaves roots. And when they tried to rip me out, I found that mine were deeper than they imagined. Thank you for staying with me so far, okay? Really. Your company makes this piece of my life seem less lonely. If this story touched your heart, leave a like. This for me is like a silent hug, one of those that warm the soul when we think no one else is listening. And if you want to come back for a coffee with me in the next report, subscribe to the channel. It's our way of keeping this conversation alive. Tell me in the comments where you are watching. I like to imagine this world of stories intersecting, and it activates the bell too. That way you don't miss out when the coffee is brewed again. Now, don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on your screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story. Who knows, maybe he doesn't talk to some part of you too.